Excited to be here. Again, my name is Monique Earl. I am a commissioner, as mentioned, for the Aviation Division for the County of Los Angeles, overseeing the 5 regional airports. I am also a management consultant, servicing state and local government entities for a firm called Guidehouse. Prior to that, spent 20 years with the city of Los Angeles, most notably in the area of public finance, a deputy mayor over budget, but also worked in the Department of Transportation as an executive officer. So spent some time in this lovely world of transportation. And so I'm excited to bring to you the other panelists, and I'll have them introduce themselves, starting with Eric.
All right, thanks, Monique. My name is Allison. I lead product for Joby Aviation. I really focus on how do we take the technology innovations we're designing, which is primarily around vertical takeoff and landing electric airplanes, so the kind of core necessary technology for urban air mobility, and then turn that into something that everyone can use on a daily basis. How do you book it through an app on your phone? Specifically, because that's how we're going to market with this. So excited, and then also working on all of the other adjacent things, like where do you take off and land? What's the network look like? All of those types of problems. So really excited to have this conversation today with Monique and David.
Great. David?
Good afternoon, everybody. And there we go. David Rich, I'm Deputy Executive Director for Mobility Planning and Strategy at Los Angeles World Airports. So we operate LAX and also Van Nuys Airport, a general aviation airport in the San Fernando Valley. I oversee mobility, and what that means at LAX is our ground transportation, commercial relationships with the likes of Uber, Lyft, taxis, shuttle buses. It's oversight over our parking system at LAX for public parking and employee parking. It's our new transportation management organization, which is aimed at helping our 40,000 plus LAX employees get to work using alternative commute strategies. And also thinking about the future of mobility and how that may affect LAX, and that's where advanced air mobility comes in. So pleasure to be with everyone. Thanks, Monique.
Great, great. Thank you, David. So we'll go ahead and kick this off. There was another talk earlier, right before this session, that really got into the meat of what we're doing in this advanced air mobility world. But I kind of want to land this plane a little bit and ask a real simple question. Where's my damn flying car? I mean, because, I'm sorry, that's the reality. I'm a Gen Xer, grew up with the Jetsons. I thought for sure I'd have a flying car to get here today. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about Joby and the work that you're doing and why you'll be one of the largest air mobility companies by 2030. That's a prediction. So tell us a little more about that. No pressure.
All right, thank you, Monique. So Joby, we're developing that, like I said, the core technologies to make urban air mobility possible. And that question of where is my flying car is a really interesting one. I think it was 10 years ago. It was 2013 when Peter Thiel wrote that kind of famous quip about, we wanted flying cars and we got whatever it is, 140 characters, which is now not true anymore because Twitter can do more, or not Twitter can do more than 140 characters. But really, I think what we've seen is over the last 10 to 15 years, the convergence of a set of technologies that have now started to open up the window for what this type of flying mobility future could look like. And primarily, there's 3 big technologies that have unlocked this. The first is batteries. So energy source, lightweight energy source is one of the kind of key physical blockers to flying anything. And so in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen kind of that steady, inexorable kind of growth of energy density or specific energy, actually more specifically, of lithium-ion batteries, which is one of the key unlocks. Second thing is the lightweight powertrains, electric motors primarily, that's enabled by all of the work in EVs and other industries actually too. Stuff with solar inverters, high efficiency switches, allow you to make really high efficiency powertrains. That's a key unlock. The third one is the internet. essentially. The smartphone, we think, is a third enabling technology to actually create this future where you can book a vehicle that lets you fly to where you want to fly on a regular basis and weave it into the on-demand ground transportation system that we've all started to use and has become second nature over the last 10 years. And so we're working on putting all of those pieces together, doing the core development of the vehicle. We've been flying a test aircraft for a number of years now, and we've done over 1,000 test flights with our aircraft. We actually just did an exhibition flight in New York City a couple days ago. I don't know if any of you caught that on the live stream with the mayor in New York City. That was pretty cool. And so we've done a lot of demonstration flights now, and we've learned a lot about this. And so we actually unveiled our production prototype earlier this summer, the next aircraft coming off of our line. We have a bunch more kind of in work behind that. And we're deep in the certification process with the FAA to get our type certification, our production certification. We've already gotten our air operator certification that will allow us to operate that on-demand airline when the vehicles are ready. And so we're working all those pieces at the same time to make this reality of flying mobility that you can book on your phone whenever you want here as fast as possible.
That's fantastic. I just came back from San Diego this past weekend. I took the train to San Diego. Lovely taking the train, but in order to get to my wine festival, I want to be able to take a mobile taxi. I mean, an air taxi, and that would take, 15, 20 minutes. So wanting that reality, David, talk about the infrastructure. I can barely charge my Tesla. So how are we going to get all the infrastructure in order to do this?
It's a great question, and I want to say first that we're always thinking about all the challenges and the difficulties of incorporating something new into our landscape, and I just want to take the opportunity to commend Eric and Joby and really all the OEMs, Whisk and Archer and Supernal, and there's many more, Volocopter, and a lot of the major companies in the auto industry and in aerospace generally that are supporting all this new development, because when you see these, like we saw in New York, and bringing all these new technologies together, it's really incredible innovation. But it is something very new, and cities are attempting, like everybody else, and airports, to understand how are these going to operate here.
Yeah.
And my job is to think about the airport, so I'm very narrowly focused on that. But I do also think about what this will look like in the city, because it has to go from one point to another to potentially get to the airport. So when we think about the infrastructure, there's a number of steps that I think that have to happen. And one of the easiest when you think about infrastructure is, well, where's this going to happen, right, on an airport? And we've been out there, talking to industry and trying to understand what makes sense. And not surprisingly, when you look at an airport and you think about what the use case probably is going to be, which is getting you to your flight to get to Tokyo or wherever you're going, or maybe you're going domestically somewhere closer, how are you going to transfer to that flight seamlessly, right? So you think about where can this be at the airport. So we've thought about that and are looking at locations, and we've been talking to the FAA about what would make sense from an airspace integration standpoint, and that's one of the first steps. But then you alluded to it, Monique. Once you do that, one of the key things you're going to have to get there is the electricity. All these models, for the most part, are battery electric operated. Again, a great thing, because there's zero emissions. But you're going to need to bring pretty significant power. We're lucky at LAX. We're partnered with our local utility. We're bringing 150 megawatts in a new receiving station to LAX. That's the first step. Then you distribute that power around LAX to the right locations. So the location of that vertiport is going to be key, because then we know to bring that power if we don't already have sufficient quantity of it. And then you need to plan for scale, because in the beginning, maybe you see just a few of these an hour, and then if you have the ability to incorporate more in your airspace, you start to see more and more over time. You need to plan for that from an electrical planning structure. I think initially there's not going to be, there may not be the need for intensive civil works, depending on where this is. Airports have locations, but in time you're going to talk about building out infrastructure for passengers and other things, waiting areas. So there's a lot to think about, and we're really just in the early innings.
Absolutely. There are a lot of concerns from not only communities regarding safety and noise and things like that, but just from government entities in general when we start talking about equity. And who are you serving? And who is this service for? How do we make sure that it's accessible to the mainstream? So talk a little bit about, I guess, sort of the ways that Joby is partnering with communities and with cities to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the number one priorities for us is understanding kind of at almost a design level, what are things we can build into our technology that actually lend themselves to the community interface, essentially, community appropriate interactions, compatibility, that's what I'm looking for, community compatibility that we really need to be able to both launch and then expand this type of a service. And so one of the key things that we think is necessary for that, there's obviously the cost question in terms of what are the cost drivers, what are the kind of fundamentals of the architecture of the service and of the system that lend themselves to cost. But there's also then the question of what is the impact of this type of a service. And so we think that from the standpoint of impact, there's some really key features that we've developed on our aircraft that I think it will go a long way toward ensuring that we have appropriate community compatibility. One of them is the fact, we've already mentioned, these are all electric, so they have zero emissions, zero en route emissions. And so especially in communities that have green grids, there's a very low environmental footprint from the vehicle operating itself. The second feature that we've spent a lot of time and effort and technology development over the last few years is acoustics. So noise is a really important factor when it comes to community compatibility. When we did this demonstration just a couple days ago, we actually had community groups at this event to see and hear these vehicles flying for themselves for the first time. And we think that showing and hearing, in some sense, is really important when it comes to understanding just what you can do with this new type of technology. And to say a little bit more on that, there is I think a misperception that when you just make something electric, it makes it quiet. I mean, it's kind of true for cars, I guess, because one of the major noise, at least external noise sources of cars is the motor. But for aircraft, that's not true. The major noise creating device is the propeller or the rotor in a helicopter. And so you have to actually understand the physics and understand what the new type of power plant, the electric propulsion, lets you do differently for an aircraft from a design perspective that you just can't do with traditional technology. And so we've spent a lot of time working on that, and we're pretty proud of the results for the vehicle that we have. Basically, when it takes off and lands vertically, if you're 100 meters away, we're talking about 65 dB or less. And that means you can carry on a conversation while the vehicle's taking off and landing, which you certainly can't do with a typical equivalent size helicopter. The second thing is that once it converts from vertical to horizontal flight, so the propellers has 6 propellers that point up, so it takes off vertically, and then tilt forward to fly like an airplane. It is very basically in an urban environment, it's nearly silent. So at 1,000 feet, 300 meters overflight, we're talking about 45 dB or less. And that's basically a whisper. And when we've actually showed this to folks in some of our test flight ranges, we've had to actually shush the crowd and tell them to be quiet because the airplane's flying over so you can hear it. And that's pretty remarkable for a small aircraft if you've ever been around them. So this is a really fundamental part of this technology that will enable community compatibility so that where we're flying, we're not impacting the communities below us. We have 100 times lower acoustic footprint in overflight than a typical helicopter. And that's a really big deal.
Absolutely. What about the equity piece and then just a little more about pricing and accessibility?
So from a pricing standpoint, this is new technology. We're introducing new technology, and there's going to be a learning curve when it comes to both the production of the aircraft as well as the operation of the aircraft. So we've been pretty transparent that we intend, our goal is to launch this service at something like Uber Black pricing in terms of a per seat cost. So not like a charter helicopter, but something more like a high-end car Uber that you can book today. And then over time, as we're able to develop the network, we're able to build utilization, we're able to improve the cost curve on manufacturing, we think we can get it down to something like UberX pricing on a per seat basis. And I think that as you drive down that curve by driving up driving up the technology curves basically on things like producibility and utilization, that becomes more and more accessible, which then gets the whole flywheel going in terms of usability and the network. And it's something that most people, or at least a lot of people, can try on a regular basis.
Perfect, thank you. David, can you talk to us a little bit about workforce development, and Eric can jump in to this as well. I mean, it seems like there'll be a number of job opportunities that will come when you have, these aircrafts come to market. What will be needed from an airport standpoint, and what can we imagine?
Thanks, Monique. So, the first thing to say is that initially these are going to be piloted really probably for much of the first decade. So one thing you're going to need is pilots, right? And pilot training on these new aircraft. They're more automated, but they'll still require that person in the cockpit. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the maintenance and the technician space, which are great jobs. For this. Other areas, on the back end, these are tech companies. Eric talked about using the technology of the cell phone and being an on-demand service. So like anything, I think there's a lot of kind of in the ecosystem around that. Types of jobs in the construction of vertiports, in the electrification. So electrification generally, and in LA we know that from trying to electrify our transportation fleets. It's a full-time employment program for our electrical workers. So there's a lot here, and in some senses it could be complementary with things we're trying to do in electrifying other areas. So I think there's a lot, and Eric's probably got a whole host more, but.
Yeah, anything on the Joby side?
Yeah, so we've actually started to develop a number of workforce programs just to feed our core workforce. We train, we have a number of transition programs. We train people in to different technician roles at our facility up in Marina, California, which is just a little bit north of Monterey at the old Fort Ord, which was shut down a few decades ago. We also have started a pilot training academy. So we're working toward being able to train pilots de novo through our own curriculum that we're developing specifically for this type of aircraft. And so we're very passionate. Our head of air operations and people, Bonnie Simi, built out JetBlue's flight pilot training program, and we are really committed to the way our service and what we're building can really contribute to the community more broadly, and particularly through these types of training programs.
Perfect, thank you. So can you talk to us a little bit, I'm sorry. Eric, can you talk to us a little bit about use cases? And what are some of the ways that you're currently working? And your firm is doing public-private partnerships with different entities. Talk to us more about that and how this is really being used practically.
So what we see is essentially this is a form of transportation that will be very familiar, actually, but yet not familiar to a lot of people. And so the canonical use case that we think of is you'll open your phone, you'll be thinking about, I need to get to the airport for my 5 o'clock flight or something. And you say, through UberX or whatever, any form of ground transportation you want to take, it's going to be an hour and a half because of the horrific traffic when freeways break, things like that. And so one of the options, though, that you'll be able to select in the Uber app, because it's one of our core partners. So we'll actually be in the Uber app, as well as in the Joby app that we're developing ourselves, is to take a Joby. And so there's going to be a network of vertiports, or they like to call them skyports. It's like the ring of it better, around the community. There'll be located in optimal locations, and so we're doing a lot of work on that. Where's the right kind of hotspots of demand that you can site these things, and so when you get the biggest bang for your buck in some sense when you put this type of infrastructure in. And then you'll be able to just select that as an option, and a car will come and pick you up, take you to that nearest skyport, and then other people will, because everyone's looking to go to the airport, right? There's a lot of people at any time. There's thousands of people who are looking to get a ride at any moment. It's pretty wild when you actually see the data behind the scenes. And so we can essentially in real time be routing additional people to kind of pool into one of these aircraft so that we can drive the economics in a more positive way. So you'll be routed to the nearest skyport, maybe one or two other people will be routed to, kind of all arrive within 3-4 minutes of each other if everything's working well. Get in the aircraft, it'll take off and land someplace pretty close to where you want to be at LAX. Now, there's a lot of work to make that happen, but that's the kind of the North Star customer experience we're looking for.
Yeah.
So instead of taking an hour and a half, maybe it takes 15 minutes.
Right.
And you actually have a higher level of assurance too, because once you take off, you kind of know where you're going to land, which is a little bit different than ground transportation. The variability is much less. So that's kind of the airport use case. We think there's other kind of canonical use cases as well. People who need to go on business trips during the day. People who just, ultimately people who are going to be commuting, if they commute once or twice a week a long distance, and they don't want to sit in their car for a couple hours. We think this will be a really interesting option as the network starts to develop more and more and more. And I think that in different, in cities right now, you see there's a trend with people not needing cars because in short trips that they typically take, they can just use on-demand transportation or, scooters or bikes or whatever. We think this type of transportation extends that in a way. It'll allow people to think about doing more things in a way that has that lighter footprint that they can do on demand than having to own the asset. And we think that's a really interesting trend overall in the kind of the macro sense of where on-demand mobility is going.
Perfect. Thank you. So, David, how do you see sort of this mode of mobility transforming, life at the airport or what you're working on?
So, it's a great question, and I'll riff a little off of what Eric was saying about how somebody might come to the airport, how they might elect to use this, and I think as we look to the future, and we all have to be somewhat humble and admit that that's a tough thing to do. But, as we build out our transportation system in LA, and we've been doing that for a number of years and we'll continue doing that, this could be complementary, right? So your surface transportation isn't going away, your ground transportation to airports isn't going away because we have eVTOLs. It's just that your passengers will have some different choices, right? And one of those choices might be somebody decides, you know what, I need to get to the airport really quick because I'm nervous about getting to my flight on time. And they'll take an eVTOL on the departure leg. But then when they come back, they'll connect at our new metro station at the airport that Metro's building contiguous with our automated people mover and take the C&K line to get home because they're not in a rush. So in providing those options, I think that's some of the opportunity here.
Yeah.
But look, there are challenges too. We're a very busy airport. We have a lot of we have 1,600 operations a day. The bulk of those large commercial airlines that move 300 people or more. And we got to bring those in safely and efficiently. Right. So the way that we incorporate them is incorporate eVTOLs in the future is something that we're going to be looking at really closely and are already looking at to enable something like this. But I think the use case that Eric describes is a clear one, and you don't just have to take it from Joby. McKinsey did a study in 2021. They said, look, 2/3 of the OEMs out there are looking at this same use case. So we want to be ready, and we want to be thinking about that too.
Great.
can I just add that it's great, the partnership and the work together with that we've been doing with LAX, with LAWA, with the FAA on the airspace side, with NASA on the airspace side. There's just a really lot of positive, I think, momentum in terms of like people wanting to solve problems and like figure out like, look, these are the use cases, and here's the ways that we can kind of think about this. With the new technologies available, and really kind of come up with ways to make it work in a practical sense.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So before I have you all give us some closing thoughts, I want to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions? We'll start here.
One quick comment.
There's a mic if you want to.
When it comes to pilot employment, we may see a reversal of history because women will probably get most of the pilot jobs.
Oh.
They can be, you usually need to do something here.
Isn't that clever?
There we go.
That women may get most of the pilot jobs because you'll want them to be under 100 pounds, and there are far more women under that weight than men. For Eric, or no, sorry, for David. I just flew from LAX, just landed here a little while ago. I had to take the fine LAX Plus bus to get my Uber. Most airports around the world do seem to sort of relegate Uber and Lyft passengers to sub-status below. LA does the taxis there too, which is unusual. Most airports give higher priority to the taxis. So why won't I, when I take my Joby to LAX, end up having to take a shuttle ride that takes as long as my Joby ride before I get to my gate? How can we change how airports think about that and what passengers, how passengers are treated?
It's a great question. So we could spend a long time talking about ground transportation and why airports are sometimes challenged and have to do that. Everybody's coming to basically get through two glass doors to a particular terminal, and it's thousands of people coming an hour. So there are challenges there. But on the eVTOL side, obviously the best case kind of blue sky scenario is that you'd be really close to the terminal. The challenge at most large airports is that we're in what's called Class B or Class Bravo airspace, some of the most congested airspace, strictly controlled, and we're bringing in, like I said, every minute a new large aircraft, and there are existing regulations around the kind of separations that you have to have between anything flying in and those large aircraft, both vertically and laterally. So it may be easier to do something that's further away, and if that decision were made, that would be the way that you would start, you would have some sort of shuttle operation. You could have an airfield shuttle, or you could have a landside shuttle. And I agree with you, if you have to do that, the use case is less compelling because you have some sort of delay to get from here to there, but it still might be faster than getting all the way from downtown in ground transportation. But if you can look at the airspace, and we're going to be looking at it, and if there are approaches that you can work in and you can get closer in, at LAX, we have parallel runways and all our terminal structures in between. We're not the only large airport that has that. So we're all talking to each other and trying to understand it. The FAA will be crucial in that discussion. And we'll be looking at two things, frankly. Is it safe? And aviation is one of the safest modes of transportation there is. So I'm confident that nothing will happen unless it's safe. But then will it have any operational impacts? We have to be very careful that it doesn't lead to delays of our normal current operations. So hope that helps.
We have time for one more question. I'll go with you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. There seems to be somewhat of a race to be first among big cities worldwide, mainly linked to big events, right? I mean, Paris Olympics 24, the race to operate advanced air mobility there. Then we have Osaka. We have the big event in Rome where they want to get ready. Where do you see LA coming in there, and when is LA going to operationalize advanced air mobility? And is that also going to be linked to a big event such as the World Cup or the Olympics, or what's the timeline? Thank you.
Sure. So we are excited to be hosting a major venue in in 2026 for the World Cup, and then of course the LA Olympics in 2028. And those are going to be car-free Olympics, so we're going to have these various venues in the city. But I think we're looking even a little closer than that to what are potentially the opportunities and the impacts of this new technology, because the timelines we hear from the first movers in the space, one of them is Joby, but also Archer in Europe, Volocopter, is that we might see certifications in 2025. I think initially it's going to be on a smaller scale, but and Eric can accommodate that. But we're considering how those may be impacted. But this is a large ecosystem, and we're just one node in that conversation. So we're just that origin and destination point for large commercial aircraft. But it's the local cities. In LA County, we have 88 cities. It's the planning departments. It's everybody else who's going to help understand how this is going to work. And there's a lot of considerations we've touched on today in terms of equity and how it'll integrate with our existing transportation system. So I think it's good to want to try to solve problems quickly and move towards innovation, but we also have to do it right.
Eric, you want to add anything?
Just add that LA is an incredibly compelling market, and one of our big partners is Delta Airlines, and their two big markets are, well, they have lots of big markets, but LA and New York are two particularly big markets for them, and so we're really excited about the opportunities in these markets where we have a lot of connectivity, a lot of need, I think a lot of opportunity to really make people's lives better, and that's what we want to do.
Great. Well, thanks so much to Eric and to David. We'll still be here to answer any questions, but please give them a round of applause, and thank you all for joining us.